Welcome to the Work, Wealth, and Travel podcast. I'm your host, Nicole, and this podcast is your guide to start creating a lifestyle by design. From entrepreneurship, money and finance, tax optimization and residencies, and everything in between, this show highlights the nuances of a true global citizen lifestyle. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Work, Wealth, and Travel podcast. In today's episode, I sit down with two global citizens, Gina and Trey. In this episode, we really dive into the holistic global citizen lifestyle. We dive into them leaving the US, where they went, where they ended up settling down, and we talk about that country, which is Malta, where they have lived for almost 1 year. We talk about the lifestyle. We talk about them getting the digital nomad visa in Malta, cost of living, weather, and pros and cons of the country after living there for almost 1 year. We also talk about building their business digitally and how they transitioned from working an in-person teaching job to working full-time remote within their own businesses. And they also have a pet. So of course we touch on traveling with a pet, as I know many of you are likely wanting to travel, live a digital global citizen lifestyle, but you have a pet. And so we touch on what that journey has looked like for them. And of course, the additional costs incurred within that journey in and of itself. So let's dive into today's episode. Before diving in, would you please both share a little bit more about your stories, your backgrounds, why you left your home country, and what that journey has looked like thus far for you?
We're so happy to be here and to share our story. We're excited about it, and we hope your listeners get some value.
Yeah.
I'll let you start.
Well, we'll actually start with, I guess, the beginning. So this is a title of our podcast, and it's a near fatal car accident was the birth of a new beginning. And so we lived in Atlanta, Georgia in the US, and he got into a near fatal car accident. At the time, of course, that was not a good thing. It was, something that was really scary, and, he couldn't work for a long time.
About a year.
Yeah.
Wasn't my fault. So there was a settlement that kicked back to us a few years later.
Mm-hmm.
So we knew that it would be a financial benefit. But during the time where I wasn't working and she was working as a third grade teacher, I was in sales and management during the car crash. I'm at home doing this self-development, and we started seeing a big contrast when she would come home bringing the energy from the Atlanta public school system. And then I would be just at home just with our cat, and none of that, just detached from everything. It was like, wow. And one day she came home. She's like, I think we should just move overseas.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, where?
Yeah. And I always wanted to study abroad in college, but it just didn't line up. So this was like a great opportunity. We both just felt like burnt out in our corporate jobs, and we just wanted a fresh start. We didn't really know what that meant or where that was going to be, but we settled on the Philippines, and that was the first place that we lived abroad and started our nomadic journey. And ever since then, we've been living in different countries and growing our business while doing that.
I want to touch on the point that you mentioned of one of you saying, I want to move overseas, and the other one just being like, okay, let's do it. Where? Like, I feel like that is not a quote unquote normal reaction to somebody wanting to just uproot your entire life and move across the world. So was that really the sentiment of like, okay, let's just do it. I'm ready to leave. You're ready to leave. Let's go. Was there a lot of pre-planning that went along in that? And then also I get a lot of questions. I'm sure you do as well. What did your family and friends think of that?
These are all great questions. And I would say for the first question, it was a little of both. When she came home and said, let's move overseas, I was 100% for it. I knew.
Which I'm really grateful for, because I know that not everybody has a partner, or not everybody has a partner that would be supportive in that way.
I was in a position that I was open. I wasn't working. I knew we were getting money at the end of it. So like, we'll figure out the finances until then, which that's a part of our story too. Once we moved overseas, the settlement did kick in, which helped her really find and discover herself, which was a blessing. But once we made the decision, we put 6 to 8 months, maybe a year
Well,
of planning.
it was a year because I carried out a whole another year of teaching, and in that time we were able to plan. So it wasn't just like we made the decision and we left. We had a decent amount of time to plan everything, and
Sold all our stuff or most of it.
yeah, and the process of telling like our family and friends was difficult, just because especially my family was not supportive of it at all. And so that created definitely some resistance with our relationship.
She's the oldest daughter. She's the firstborn.
Yeah.
She's got a great teaching job, which she went to school for, got in debt for, which has good benefits, which is stable. It's in America. And
Yeah.
her parents, her dad especially, was not having it. And
Yeah.
was more so mad, especially towards me, as if it was my idea. And we're like, she is the one who came home to say this. But anyways, I was the bad guy for a little bit. We have a great relationship. Shout out to Vince. But it was, my parents were
They were supportive.
they were supportive, but they still were like, the Philippines is third world. You know, we have our own views of the Philippines if you've never been. So our parents gave us a little friction there.
Yeah.
But my parents were a little bit more supportive, but I think hers were just protective of her being the daughter.
Yeah.
A lot of our friends,
It was very mixed.
it was mixed.
Yeah, it was like a mixed reaction, and definitely it makes it harder to be like, am I doing this right? Like, is this the right thing to do? But we did it. We followed our intuition, we followed our gut, and it was, I feel like, the best decision for us.
We wouldn't be doing this if it weren't for it.
So I'm curious, because a lot of listeners probably have or will faced a similar situation of not having supportive parents, what really turned, and Gina, I guess more specific to your family, if they were unsupportive, what really turned the tables for, or if that has happened at this point, maybe it hasn't yet, for them to be like, okay, you know what, this is actually an interesting opportunity for you instead of just all negatives.
I mean, I'll be honest, like, I didn't talk to them for a while once we were abroad, and that was very hard to navigate and just deal with. But it was necessary because I was in a place where I was figuring out this whole nomad life, and I became a part of our business, Wave Enterprise. So I was, entering this whole new mindset and this whole another identity. And so I couldn't have, any negativity like in my vortex at all, because that's not what you need when you're, trying to change your life. And so it was like that for a while. We have a great relationship now. I think that it was just a matter of them like seeing photos and like seeing like, I would post updates and stuff on social media, and they'd be like, oh, she looks happy. What are we going to say about it?
I want to interject and say, when we first started traveling, we started a travel vlog. So like, and we might touch on visas and things in a little bit more in this conversation, but in the Philippines, we're on a tourist visa. So every 30 days we would leave, come back. And we took that as an opportunity to see, Vietnam, Taiwan. We went to Bangkok and other islands in the Philippines, and we would travel vlog. So every time we went somewhere new, her parents were like, where's the vlog? Where's the vlog? And then they're showing everybody. So that was it starting to.
I think they just like didn't know anything about the culture, and they only know what's on the news. So of course they're going to be scared, for us and our safety. But when they started to see this new life through our eyes and how we are experiencing a culture, they were like, wow, this is interesting. This is something nobody in their vortex had ever done before. So it was just new, and anything new is always scary.
I'm always curious what families' opinions are, because I'm very grateful to have a supportive family, but I do feel like it can be difficult for some individuals, especially if you're really thinking about, I mean, I don't know if anybody goes into this lifestyle thinking to do it for the long term, but a lot of the times it does become longer term when you want to have the support from back home, even if you're not always back home. So let's talk about the business and money aspect. You leave your jobs, you leave a steady teaching job. What has that looked like? And how long have you been traveling? And then what has your entrepreneurship journey looked like?
Another great question. We've been traveling for 5 years. when she mentioned she became part of the business, I had a vision of like a record label. I'm a musician, producer, DJ, artist, all the music things. So I was like, Wave Enterprise is going to be this record label. While I was at home that whole year, I was like building this entrepreneurship mindset around this record label. Once we made the decision to move, it started looking different because we uprooted that and all the clients that we had there. I mentioned the settlement coming when we're in the Philippines. She was teaching online English, and that's what was going to support. We were like, okay, we're going to get this settlement. We're going to start teaching English she was going to start teaching English online. The Wi-Fi in Manila was awful. So she wasn't able to continue that. And she had this, we call it quarter life crisis, where she was like, okay, I've been teaching. I just moved overseas. I want to teach online. And she was like, what do I do?
Yeah. So I kind of like had a freak out moment abroad, and I was just like, I don't know what I'm good at because I've only known teaching. So he was just like, well, we need a website for our business. We need social media management. And I just started doing that, and I fell in love with it, the social media part. And so that's
the creation part. She likes the creation. She likes the scrapbooking,
strategy. Yeah. All that stuff. And ever since then, we've been, growing our expertise in that area. And then like we started to open up our unique selling point to offer podcast services, because him with the audio, all the audio things. So we have, a unique skill set, and we kind of took advantage of the whole COVID situation because everyone started a podcast. So we were like, well, this is great positioning for us because everyone needs, help with their social media presence and their podcast. And so, yeah.
Yeah. And I would say all the while we were building our skills, like she was copywriting. And in this whole digital world, we were both figuring out what we liked and didn't like. And she loved to scrapbook and make these arts and crafts with her kids, and she totally transferred that to the digital world. Like she's a Canva wizard. She also does captions and writing, where she is not her favorite, but she is really good at it. And so like the social media world, I've seen her over the last 5 years. If you put 5 years into something, you can really, really grow into something that you did not even imagine. And I've seen that. We both are like, wow. So over the last 5 years, mentioning COVID, we really positioned ourselves to be social media and podcast experts, and then digital nomad lifestyle.
So you both work together to grow the business and in the business.
Yes.
Absolutely. And that's a great point, because we were building our individual skills, and then before COVID and then kind of during it, we were working with clients, but kind of separately, even though we were under the same umbrella. But we kind of came together one day and was like, it'll be better if we're prospecting and looking for clients who need both social media and podcast.
I think like our relationship would be more harmonious, and like the power of two people coming together for a greater purpose is a real thing. And so we were like, we really need to make this happen together and like merge everything that we're doing together, and it worked. So yeah,
way better, because we have one client. Okay, I edit this podcast, I know what it's about, I know what clips to get. She makes it pretty with the branding, the templates, and then we have the caption, posting, everything. It's so much more cohesive when our brains are on, all of our focus is on one person, and it's so much more fruitful and rich. And at that point, we pivoted and just that's where we started focusing our attention and energy on like prospecting and making sure our clients needed both. And they're out there. We just had to focus on that.
And I'm curious, are there any struggles that you have faced in being a couple and then working together in the same business?
Yes, of course. For example, we had to really set boundaries about talking about work. Like after dinner, we cannot talk about anything about work anymore.
Or finances.
Yeah.
In bed.
Yeah.
No work or finances. Because I mean, living and being together, COVID really, we already were only together before COVID, and then COVID made it even more. And then our work is together. Everything we do is together. So it was really hard to find where the lines stopped and started. And it was just always like, okay, we're done talking about work. 5 minutes later, we're like, we're talking about work. So,
but I also want to preface that by saying, for the majority of our relationship before we got married, we were long distance across the country in the US. And so when we, came together, we got married. And then when we moved abroad, it was just us. And like, I think it helped us to become stronger because we only had each other to talk about everything. And so we really depend on each other for a lot of things. But of course, like we had to draw boundaries. And we had to like personally not take, feedback personally. So that was another thing. Yeah.
Because we both had to distinguish like, okay, she's not being mean. She's not trying to attack me. This is for business. And we've done a good job of growing that muscle. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we're a couple, so we have our bad days. We've learned how to not let that affect. Like if we have a meeting that day and we were just arguing about something right before the meeting, we learn how to compartmentalize. I think more so our personal business and content is affected. If we have a bad day, we're like, all right, we're not shooting our podcast today. But other than that, we've been really good at compartmentalizing, figuring out what's constructive, and not talking about money in bed. Like that's a big one.
Are you looking to become a diversified global citizen? If this is a lifestyle that you're seeking to create, we can help. Whether it be multiple residencies, citizenships, bank accounts, trusts, or company formations, we operate in 30 plus of the most tax-friendly jurisdictions around the globe to get you structured properly. Head to the link in the show notes to learn more and to get your global citizen journey underway today.
Yeah, it's funny. My partner and I, we don't work in the same business, but we do. I mean, we travel the world together. We're always with each other. And so you really do have to have some sort of boundaries. So I was curious how that looked for you, but I can only imagine going from long distance to living a lifestyle where you work at home, you work together in the same business, you work and play together, and most things are together. And especially, I definitely want to dive into where you live. And so I think it's great that you have more of a home base because you probably have friends outside of each other that you have made and connections that you've made and where you've made a home base instead of traveling the world, having short-term connections, but really at the end of the day, only having each other. So let's dive into, after the Philippines, I'm curious where else you lived. And then now you've relocated in Malta for almost the last year. So I would love to dive into lifestyle, pros, cons of Malta.
Yeah. So after the Philippines, we lived in Mexico for a little bit and we did some workaways there, some work exchange where we stayed and, in exchange for, we did their social media. And so we did that twice in Mexico. And then after we were in Guatemala.
Like Atitlan in Guatemala, it's beautiful. We're there for maybe 6 months.
Yeah.
Went back to Mexico for maybe another 5 months to meet up with a friend we met in the Philippines. So talking about connections, we met someone in the Philippines, got really close to him, and he's a musician friend of mine. So we met up in Mexico and started doing like live gigs. We put together a set. We were in Puerto Escondido and then San Cristobal de las Casas. After that,
we went to Italy,
because she's half Italian, and her family, her maiden name is Milazzo, and there's a town called Milazzo where her grandfather is directly from. Mm-hmm. And no one except for her younger sister has been to Italy or Sicily. Mm-hmm. So we got to see where her grandfather's from. I think that there's a big chance that I have some blood in Africa. So I have a DNA test sitting right over there that I haven't taken since Valentine's Day. But I believe there's blood in Africa, and we think that Malta is very strategic. So we did Italy.
And then, we went to Tunisia after Italy, and that was kind of, a story about our visa situation here. And long story short, it took way longer to get our visa here in Malta. And for anyone listening to this who doesn't know, like if you go to Europe and you're an American citizen, you have 3 months and then you have to leave for 3 months before you enter again. And we were told it was going to take like a month and a half, but it ended up taking like 3 months. And so we had to leave. And so the closest place was Tunisia.
It was literally the last day. Like we had like maybe 2 or 3 days left on our visa, but our acceptance, we're like, okay, we're waiting until like 5 p.m. to see if we get our acceptance. We had all the Airbnbs and places lined up in Tunisia, so it wasn't blind, but we didn't get the acceptance yet. We land in Tunisia. The day we get there, we get the acceptance. We have a cat. So Tunisia's high rabies. Malta is rabies free. So she had to do a test that took over 90 days to get the results, and we had to stay there. So we were forced to stay in Tunisia for 3 months. So that was the place before here in Malta. So we got accepted with the Nomad visa and currently in Malta.
And long story short about like the visa situation here for anyone who wants to, do the Nomad visa, it's a very straightforward process. It just took longer. Like it's very simple. All the instructions are easily laid out on the website. It was a lot of paperwork, but we did it and it just took longer.
So why Malta? And talk to me. I mean, I'm sure listeners are very interested. There's interesting tax incentives for Malta. If you have a company, we'll talk about that on another episode probably. But I'm curious just in terms of the lifestyle, also the cost of living, the similar like-minded entrepreneurs, if you have met any. So just in general, the lifestyle that you have experienced. But I mean, first and foremost, I'm curious, why Malta?
He's partly Nigerian. His dad did a DNA test before, so he has to know his other side. But we wanted to go on an ancestral tour to know where we're from. I think in the US, a lot of us lose our identity. And so we are really curious to know where we're from and go to the places. So we went to Sicily and we want to go travel in Africa where he's from. So Malta is very much in between.
Directly. It might be farther to go to Nigeria, but Malta's directly in the middle. We can literally see Sicily from our balcony, which is beautiful. And
obviously they speak English here. Well, not obviously, but they speak English here. That's their main language. They do speak Maltese, which is like Arabic and Italian. But if you speak English, they will speak English to you. So that's another, part of the decision that made it more attractive to us, because it's just easier to live when people speak English.
It's an island.
Yes.
And we live on the sister island of Gozo. It's still the country of Malta, but it's so much more island life and local, and it's easy to get to Malta. The public transportation is free and the ferries are extremely cheap, like €1 for residents. That's another reason. It's accessible. It's, you can grow your own cannabis here legally, which I'm interested in. I think it's fascinating.
And there is really a great hub of other like-minded entrepreneurs and creative people. And like just in general, their culture really values creativity. And, they have so many festivals and so many different events and, concerts and all these things, cultural like events going on every single week. And that's really attractive to us. And we've met so many other people who maybe are on the Nomad visa or are just other entrepreneurs. And it's just like a hub. There's places in the world, I'm sure you know this, that just attract like-minded people. And we believe this is one of them, which is why we're extending our visa for another year.
1 year hasn't been enough. Okay, like 6 months in, we're just starting to feel a family form around us. And like, we've been intentional about it. And like, now we're going now with our community and like these different pockets of how we brought this community together. Like you said, we have friends outside of our own thing. And it's like, wow, look at all these people we've brought together. Oh my gosh. we have to do this a little longer to deepening these relationships. So to just see how much they can flourish and what can come out of them, and not for a selfish benefit, but like how much beauty can we, if it's like collaborating with a musician or doing an event or creating content, it's like how much dope stuff can we make together? That's the intention.
And it's interesting to hear that you want to stay a second year, so for 2 years, in order to really continue to get to know the people, the culture. So let's talk about weather. I'm curious about temperatures, how hot it can get in certain times of years, and cost of living. I think those are two things that a lot of people are interested in when they're looking into relocation.
So actually, there's a lot of people who retire here in Malta, especially in Gozo where we live, because there's 300 days of sunshine a year. And that's one of the things that they say on the website to attract, nomads.
They're not lying either.
Hence the sun shining. But it gets cooler during, typical like winter months, but cooler is like maybe it gets to 50 Fahrenheit.
Mm-hmm.
That's like cool. And as hot as it gets is probably like 100 or
Yeah, we had some hot days this summer, but we're loving the weather.
Right now it's like perfect though.
This is our vibe right now. It's like the beginning of fall, or maybe like the end of spring going into summer right now for like a Chicagoland area maybe. The cost of living, we chose to live here in Gozo because it's a bit cheaper. I think Europe in general is a lot more expensive than all the places we've named before that. So the Philippines, Mexico, Guatemala, Europe in general wasn't a shock, but we're like, okay, we gotta make a little bit more, and we've learned that and gotten accustomed to it being in Sicily last year. But Gozo, we're paying 900 euros, 925 euros for our apartment right now, just to be transparent.
And we have 3 bedrooms.
A beautiful view of the Mediterranean Sea. And we think it's a steal because we need space. We work from home, live from home.
We probably don't need 3 bedrooms, but
No.
we had kind of a difficult time getting a pet-friendly place. And this place just so happened to have 3 bedrooms. And we were really sold on the view as well. So, yeah.
It's a steal for the price. Some may think that's high. Some may think that's not high. If you see it, it's beautiful. And there are places on the mainland that you would get maybe half of this for twice as much more, because it's very dense in Malta. It's very, very, very dense. So if you like big city, if you like activity like that.
It's like New York-y vibes, but on an island.
On an island. So you get, yeah. Sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah.
So it's a little more expensive on the mainland.
So pros and cons. What would you say in your experience? We touched on a few different topics, but is there anything else, or even what we've touched on, that you would include in pros and cons of lifestyle in Malta?
Well, I think the pros are what we said already, is their culture is very, like, they have so many events, so many organized events. Like every season we get a whole pamphlet of all the events for that season, which I think is really amazing. And they always, have like local bands and local artists. Like they have just so much going on. And we've never experienced that in other countries where it's like really organized that way. And so I think that's awesome. That's a pro. The weather is a pro. The island feel of Gozo is a pro. The public transportation, they speak English. It's pretty easy to just get around. Like we use Uber sometimes, so that's easy to get around with. And just like the like-minded people that we've come in contact with here. And cons are the construction. They are expanding a lot, and like you probably can't hear it. I hope you can, but there's like a hotel being built right in front of our house. That's kind of inevitable, I think. In any place there's going to be construction. It's just a lot here.
You said all the pros that I was going to say. I actually was going to say there's not many cons to list. Even though we've been here 10 months, we still come across locals who say like, you're in the honeymoon phase, just wait, you'll see. And like, we're bragging about how there's card reader machines all on the island, when in the Philippines, you'll be lucky to have someone that can swipe your card. But we're doing Apple Pay, and I'm telling people this is blowing our mind on an island. One thing I would say, because I've been really moving around and doing DJ gigs, and since I'm on the sister island, I have to take the ferry a lot, and it's very touristy here. So there's always tourists who, if you're somewhere for the first time, you're not used to traveling, you're not efficient with it, you're just shuffling and absent-minded. I'm like, move. Or you're getting on the bus and people run on the bus and they're like, oh, sorry, wrong bus, we don't know the bus system. So that kind of gets draining if you use the transportation every day and you're going through like very crowded areas. Is dealing with the tourists every day. It's like, it can be a little heavy up here, but that does not even come close to the pros we've experienced yet. And we're not selling Malta. This is just our experience. We love it so far.
I think one more pro that I'm thinking of too is that it's so cheap to travel to other places in Europe. Like we're looking to go to Barcelona or Athens, and it's like 40 euros for a round trip flight, which that's, in our opinion, pretty inexpensive. So if you want to like go travel around, it's pretty reasonable.
And we can talk about traveling and stuff like that all day. We talked about Workaway before. They gave us a place to stay. They fed us and we gave them a service. Sometimes you work at their hotel. We gave social media. We look at things like house swapping as well. So if we can get a 40 euro round trip, get our place to stay for free, like this is a beautiful situation as far as seeing Europe for this phase in our life. Very budget friendly. So we think that's a huge advantage for us.
I appreciate you sharing what you have seen in your opinion as pros, cons, and a bit more into lifestyle in Malta, having lived there for quite some time. I'm curious, you mentioned that you travel with a cat, a pet. And I'm curious some of the struggles that you may have had with that. And also we do have a lot of clients who are looking to travel with pets, and immigration, pet passports, vaccinations, like that just becomes a huge headache.
Yeah, I think our cat has been something that's stressed me out a lot with traveling. I'm not going to lie. It's definitely another layer to consider. And like the flight I was just talking about, that's 40 euros. That's not a pet friendly flight. So there are things that you have to think about if you're traveling with a pet. The most expensive places that we've had to deal with in navigating like paperwork and like getting all the documents is the US. Like anytime we went home, we would have to like get all these appointments to get her vaccines or her health certificate, and it was so expensive. So it's just really a headache for us to go home sometimes, just because
when we leave, it's like 400 plus USD. And to get there from the Philippines, we paid 20 USD for the same paperwork, So we've learned that there's so many varying prices as far as health certificate. Also, we've learned that every country you're entering is different. So they have different requirements. Like we got caught up in Tunisia, which is high rabies, and Malta is rabies free. So that was a unique situation to us. So where you're coming from and where you're going matters. Every situation. So when you go to get your health certificate, the vets, they have to look up what the requirements are because it's all unique. So that's something to consider, what kind of pet you have. I hear cats are a lot less complex than dogs even. And our cat has given us a headache for 5 years. So I think there's a bit more planning to go with dogs. That's not my personal experience, but that's what I've heard.
And I would just recommend for anyone who wants to travel with their pet to like keep all of the paperwork, because sometimes there's something that you don't even know that you need. But so we have like most of the papers we always travel with are for our cat. So we have a lot of paperwork. And also, just like he said, not every vet even knows what the requirements are in different countries. So it's best for you to do your own research and like look up, if there's a Facebook group for people who already have experienced that with their pet, like specifically go in there and do your own research, because you have to be the expert on it. Unfortunately, like if they make a mistake on the paperwork, like that's on you because you didn't double check it. So yeah, I think just be diligent with the paperwork, and you have to check with your airline to make sure it's pet friendly and all that sort of thing. But our cat's our baby. We wouldn't travel without her. We wouldn't leave her behind. So it's all worth it.
Even for a weekend. So you mentioned the pet passport. In the EU, they offer pet passports, which our vet is out of stock, and we're going to get one in like maybe 3 weeks. But you're able to travel from country to country without having to go through the paperwork every time. They just stamp it, and she's just like cruising with you. And we do these little weekend 40-euro round trips. We want to bring our baby and like just stamp the passport. So we think that's going to be a really good investment. I think he said it's 35 euros or like 70 euros. Either way, that's way cheaper than having to get a health certificate every time. So I mean, the EU only does that, which it's so nice.
Well, I appreciate you sharing all of the experiences that you've had when it comes to travel, lifestyle in Malta, and even your pet. That's something that I wish I could travel with a pet. I don't think I ever would, just for the headache, quite honestly, but I would absolutely love to. So where can people find you online?
We are very heavy on Instagram. She's an Instagram wizard. So you can find us at Wave Enterprise Co. And the E between Wave and Enterprise are shared. So it's just one. Wave Enterprise Co. You can find my artist page is Trepace, TRESPEACE. And you can find us at waveenterpriseco.co, the same spelling as Instagram, but just .co. And that's our website. You see all of our portfolio. And DM us if you have questions about digital nomad. Am I doing this good enough, or can you do it better?
Yeah, no,
do it better.
it's
Do it
good.
better.
No, yeah, anyone can DM us if you have questions about, living nomadically, or if you need help with your podcast or social media or any of those things.
You've just listened to the Work, Wealth, and Travel podcast. If anything from this episode resonated with you, I'd appreciate if you share this podcast on your socials. And of course, be sure to tag us at Work, Wealth, and Travel. And don't forget to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for joining us on this global citizen journey, and we'll see you in the next episode.